Hey everybody, and welcome back to... I forgot. Hey everybody, welcome back to Outside Notes. This is the third episode. We're talking Ikoria Limited. This time we're going to be focusing on Mutate, what it can do in my hands and other people's hands. We're going to talk to a special guest, and we're going to go over some of the tips and tricks that you may need to know, maybe you don't know, when you sit down and play some Ikoria Limited, and especially if you get this Mutate deck. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know, of course, is, well, how does it even work at all? So for that, we go directly to our good friend, Matt Tabak, who explains it here for us, although the video's 4 minutes and 51 seconds long. So we can't watch the whole thing. I mean, you can watch the whole thing, but just for the sake of explaining it here, shorten it down a little bit, okay? Mutate is a complicated mechanic, but in a good way because it leads to more options. And that's always a good thing in a game of Limited. So the first big decision that you have to make is whether you're going to pay the mutate cost or just the casting cost of the card. Sometimes the mutate cost is actually cheaper than the full cost of the card, so that's an additional benefit you get. But most mutate creatures have a triggered ability that goes on the stack whenever it gets mutated either onto or if it's the thing mutating on, and that'll give you a benefit as well. Now, one thing that you always have to keep in mind is in order to mutate, you need something to mutate onto, and that cannot be a human. So you want to have some number of creatures in your deck that are not humans. If I mutate onto a creature and the creature gets killed from underneath it, what happens? The good news is your mutate creature just comes onto the battlefield as if it were cast from your hand, so you don't lose both. You only lose the one that was targeted with the removal. But you won't get the mutate trigger either. But then again, you might get it for cheaper than you would have cast either, so it's a reasonable failsafe. So one big question that you'll have is, which creature do I put on top? Because when you mutate, you either put the creature on the top or below the card. And the interesting part is that whichever the top card is dictates, well, a lot of things, but primarily for us limited players, the power and toughness. That means that in the vast majority of times, you're going to want to put the creature with the biggest power and toughness on the top because obviously, right? But there are times when it's close, like if your creature could be a 3/3 or a 2/4. Maybe the 2/4 is actually a better... Quiet. The 2/4 might actually be a better blocker in some scenarios, and you may want to go for that. Look, put the creature with the biggest power and toughness on top. This is just what you're going to want to be doing. If you need blocks, you can go for a defensive position. Yes, I know. It's Magic. There are exceptions. There's always exceptions in Magic. It's this game of exceptions. Vast majority of the time, though, bigger creature goes on top. One of the exceptions in the set that you may want to look out for is Blade Banish. Now, Blade Banish cares about creatures with a certain power, and that means that when you go to do this, if you think your opponent has it and you feel like you can play around it, it might be worth it, because one of the things about Mutate is that the more you can keep mutating onto the same thing and getting the recursive triggers, the further ahead you can get. Another thing to keep in mind is anything with hexproof is the perfect mutate target, which is probably why you don't see very much of it in the set. There's only a couple of cards. One of them is Wingfold Terran, and the other one is is it Crystalline or is it Crystalline? Well, let's just look.
Crystalline.
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 All right, it's Crystalline. Where were we? Right, Wingfold Terran, which is somehow the one that I actually can pronounce, and then Crystalline Giant, which is a rare. Another tip that is really easy to forget is that Mutate kind of gives haste to the creature. So like if you play a 1/1 and then you mutate onto it, if it's a 4/4, you can put the 4/4 on top and that thing's ready to rumble now. And that can throw combat math off in a big way for your opponent. All right, so those are some basic tips for Mutate, but I thought we'd bring in a real professional, at least a real professional Magic player, not so much a professional in any other way. Let's call our friend Luis Scott-Vargas and see what he thinks about Mutate. Did I catch you at a bad time, Luis?
You said you wanted the casual experience.
Yeah, I guess we're getting... Mutate, Luis.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about like an ideal Mutate deck, what does that look like? How does it win?
So there's like two parts to it. One is you want to make sure you have things to mutate onto. Mm-hmm. Essence, Symbiote, and Farfinder are the ones I like the most of those. just because they both give you value when you mutate them, or in the case of Farfinder, when you play it. And the thing with Mutate is funny is like it actually puts you pretty far behind on board.
Yeah.
Like intrinsically. So Dreamtail Heron might seem like a sweet card, and it is, but if they kill the thing you mutate onto it, you'll lose plenty of games where it doesn't matter that you like drew an extra card. Because you effectively had to sacrifice a creature in order to get it out there. So the high rarity mutate cards are very good. So uncommons like Auspicious Starix are pretty important. Archipelagore is busted. You want some of the top end stuff. And I think it's less about mutating 3 or 4 times on the same creature. You can do that, and sometimes some games that'll be good. But a lot of the times it's going to be like I mutate Migratory Greathorn on one creature. I'll mutate a Heron onto like a different creature to spread out your threats so that one removal spell doesn't just like dumpster you.
Okay. Look, I've seen people do it where they pile up a whole bunch of mutate things on one thing, and it's just trigger, 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 and the game can kind of snowball from there. Are you about done eating?
I think that because mutate, yes, it combines the abilities, but it plays way more like sacrifice a creature than it does Voltroning 2 creatures. And with the exception of some of the mutate triggers that really incentivize you, like Chittering Harvester, the one that makes them sack a creature. Yeah, that's a great one to keep mutating onto because you get a pretty significant edge every time you do. I think that even the more dedicated mutate decks don't really want to be all mutate all the time. Mutate's just a fine thing to have. Having like 3 powerful mutate cards in a black-green deck is just a great way to go about it. I like having a good mix of mutate enablers like Farfinder and Symbiote, and payoffs like mutate creatures. And then some of the best ones are things like Parcel Beast, which doesn't require much from you than just to stick around.
What about the cheap enablers? So you're not high on those then, like the Brushwag and stuff like that?
Oh, I like the Brushwag. I don't really like Mysterious Egg all that much because I haven't found the payoff there to be worth it. Brushwag I actually think is fine because look, Brushwag's not a card I would just tend to put in my deck, but if you draw a Brushwag and don't draw a mutate creature and you have 8 lands in play, like this is a card. They have to respect it. They have to eventually trade for it. The egg, on the other hand, does just nothing. Like Boot Nipper is a good one because it gets a good ability to transfer onto a different creature, right? Right. Like whether it's lifelink onto a big creature or the Mondo combo of Porky Parrot where you're like choose Death Touch, mutate Parrot, and then that's just games. I guess Glimmerbell's like that too. The jellyfish that untaps. Yeah. You've got some pretty strong Mondo mutate combos.
So one last question. Where do you put the mutate deck kind of in the hierarchy of archetype?
I think that the blue-green mutate deck is real. There's a problem with mutate overload. Like at some point you just don't want to take your 9th mutate card because you just can't afford it. But remember also, mutate combos with itself in a way where you can play a turn 4 Migratory Greathorn, turn 5 put a Dreamtail Heron onto it and get both triggers. Look, at the end of the day, Red-White Cycling's the best deck and nothing else is even close. But if you told me, hey, you've got a deck with 2 Farfinders, a Brushwag, 2 Essence Symbiotes, a Frostlinks, and like 6-ish good blue and green mutate creatures, I'd feel pretty good about that.
I'll let you finish your pre-dinner meal. Thanks for stopping by, Luis. Bye. Oh man. So we'll let Luis go back and finish his dinner or whatever. This might be a little embarrassing for me, I'm not gonna lie. I did draft a mutate deck just for you. So here's our first pack, and I opened up Auspicious Starix, which is a card that Luis and I just mentioned. Then I got Mythos of Nethroi, and I'm gonna kind of cruise through these picks. I kept picking as many mutate cards as I could, basically, including a Migratory Greathorn here, I believe is what I took. Yes, I did. And why don't we just zoom ahead so you can get a chance to see what this deck actually looked like. I ended up being Obzon colors, so green, black, and white, which I think is fairly typical with an Eerie Ultimatum in this deck. I got another Auspicious Starix, 2 Migratory Greathorn, 2 Farfinders, so I'm thinking I can cast this Eerie Ultimatum no problem, right? Let's take a look at what happened in game 1. I end up getting myself in a situation where my opponent's ahead of me early, but I'm in a fairly stable board state thanks to Migratory Greathorn, Insatiable Hemophage, another Migratory Greathorn. So when I get to do this, and by the way, this is exactly what I was talking about. Look at all these triggers. Drain them, search for a land, search for a land. It's a beautiful thing when you can actually start to stack up a whole bunch of them. But then I get the idea that I am going to start playing things for this Eerie Ultimatum. So I do a cool trick here. I cycle a greater sandworm that I could even cast at some point because I want it in the graveyard so I can bring it back with the ultimatum. On top of that, I've got this Skull Prophet tapping to mill myself every turn, so I'm filling up my graveyard with sweet stuff for the ultimatum. And it's time to get busy with this Eerie Ultimatum. And I do it. Look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards. So I'm feeling like I just did it, right? I get back a Blitz Leech in there to knock off this Brushwag while the shields are down, and everything's looking so good. So I start off my next turn by going for the Auspicious Starix. I put it onto the Great Horn, which already has another Great Horn on it. I put it over, again, I just want the 6/6 here, but now I get a whole bunch of sweet triggers, right? So I get to dig up a couple of lands, I get some Starix triggers. This is now the 4th thing that was on there, or 2, 3, 4, 3rd thing that was on there. And I hit Gyruda and Farfinder. So that's 2 triggers from the Starix plus a land, but I flew a little too close to the sun because look, I milled myself out. I have no way to win this turn. I need another turn to do it, and I'm out of cards. And my opponent notices this after my attack and just passes the turn back to me. Look, don't blame me. I was just going for value. Okay, so let's just put that behind us, right? We don't need to see any more of that. I did, though, succeed in showing you how much value you can get from Mutate. All right, I've got a couple of highlights from Limited from the week for you. So let's look at this first one. This is from Kenji, of course, Mutate again. And he's got a real nice victory here. Check this out.
I feel like I'm going to lose this game to a counter.
This Zenith Flare is for 16 right now. He has 32 points of burn in his hand off of 2 spells.
Falcon Punch! Ay, ay, ay.
That is one way to do it. I will say that. That was a pretty good hit, but this next part is unreal. So as you can see, Ben's fallen very far behind on board, but has Ruinous Ultimatum in hand.
Okay.
And even draws a Swamp, which needs 2 black, 2 red, 3 white. So if you look at the battlefield, there's 3 white here, and there's 1 black source, so they're going to need another, and then there's already 3 red. So a black or even a white source here would be enough to be able to cast the ultimatum, which would wipe the opponent's board and probably win Ben the game. On top of that, he has access to Migratory Greathorn. Now, he won't be able to cast it this turn, but if he can get that Greathorn down, mutate it, find the land, he can untap and potentially just win the game on the spot. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, dude, just mutate into your 2 best cards. Easy peasy.
Oh.
It turns out he didn't put enough mana in the deck to actually be able to cast the ultimatum.
What'd you do that for, dude?
I don't know, man. Oh, hey, and I got some more land out of it. Cool. Neato. So wait, can I? There, I literally can't cast this then, right?
Oh, that's never the way you want to go out. One more clip for you. Check this out.
Whew, and this board looks phenomenal. Now, even if they Eerie Ultimatum, we have a chance to draw our thing. This is a game! Real game activated.
So as we come in, our hero here is way ahead. Opponent's down to 4. And he even jokes, well, if they have Eerie Ultimatum, we could actually have a game here. And then the opponent plays Eerie Ultimatum. But look at the hand. Ruinous Ultimatum in hand.
Okay.
But doesn't have enough mana to cast it. Needs another black mana source. Look at that Eerie Ultimatum. Boom!
Yes! Gosh, I haven't felt so happy in a long time.
Unbelievable.
So good. Messed up.
Even the opponent had to give the nice on that one. Ultimatum for like 10 creatures and get ultimatum to lose all of them the next turn. That's just some of the stuff that you could do in Ikoria Limited. Look, we've been talking about cycling and stuff like that. You heard Luis mention it. There is a very high power ceiling on some of the decks in this format, and some of them are Mutate. I hope that this week's video helped you out. Maybe it was a little entertaining, had a little fun. We'll see you next time. That's going to do it for this episode of Outside Notes. Thanks so much for coming along. Make sure that you subscribe to the other channels so that you can see the other sweet content that we have coming out, and we'll see you next time.